just walking in the street in casual conversation with a friend, or listening to music on an iPod or a DVD, we're able to sense an amazing array of sounds. We're able to sense even a very tiny, small whisper, as well as a philharmonic orchestra, which is a wide range of music.
The ear has three parts to it. We all know the outer part here, which we call the external ear. And then there's the middle ear, and then there's the inner ear. The middle ear has an eardrum that vibrates back and forth, and that's where the sound comes through from our ear canal to the eardrum, vibrates, and when it vibrates, it hits against three different bones. These are actually, one of them is the smallest bone, the stapes bone, otherwise known as people in the vernacular as the stirrups, but the stapes bone is the smallest bone in the human body. And as the eardrum vibrates against this, it takes the sound waves and amplifies it and brings it right to the inner ear. As it goes through the inner ear, there's a fluid that circulates inside the inner ear. And the sound waves vibrate against this fluid, and this fluid then moves along through the inner ear, through the cochlea, and as it moves through the cochlea, it actually has a waveform that bounces back and forth on little hair cells inside the semicircular
and this
canals.
This is going on both sides in stereo, huh?
Both sides in stereo. And as it goes through there, the brain then gets these impulses and somehow comes together and we hear sound. The inner ear has two parts, the hearing part and the balance part. You know, HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave us two GPS systems in our ears on both sides, so that every time if I turn my head to this, you know, what happens is these two systems have to work together to say, oh, he's turning his head 30 degrees to right, you know, 30 degrees up from the floor, and keep the person in balance so they don't fall down.
Because the ear is so sophisticated, it's very important to make sure that we protect it, to avoid loud sounds at concerts or at weddings, to avoid excessively loud music through earphones, and to make sure that in case we have a wax buildup, to be able to see a doctor to best be able to remove it.
It's interesting, why do we have two ears? I always wondered. There's certain parts of the body we have two eyes, two ears, two kidneys.
The reason is very simple.
Yeah.
If you had just one ear,
right,
and someone was talking to you on the other side, you wouldn't be able to localize sound. That's why, if let's say a person has a hearing loss on one side,
yes,
many times we'll say, use a hearing aid on that side. You know, person, but I can still hear everything. You may be able to hear, but you may be not, when someone talks, you may not be able to talk from the right or from the left side.
You wouldn't be able to tell.
You may not be able to tell. So
really?
What happens is by having both ears working properly, you can tell if someone's talking to you right or someone's talking to you on the left side. Right. So that's important. And I mentioned before in balance, you know, our GPS system here, okay, you have it on both sides. If you just had it on one side here, you might be tilting to one side. There's no question if someone has a diseased labyrinth, where the inner ear is diseased on one side, they will constantly feel like they're dizzy, they'll walk, they'll sort of like stagger because they can't keep the balance because the other side's not working properly. So both have to work together in concert, and the whole mechanism is something that you just,
it's
unbelievable.
It's incredible.
Absolutely.
That's godless Hashem.
Yes.
That's the whole,
yes.
the whole purpose of this whole thing.
This is what an ear infection would look like, is there's right behind the eardrum, it's filled with a fluid, and that fluid prevents the eardrum from moving back and forth. If this eardrum doesn't vibrate properly, the sound can't go all the way through the system, you don't hear properly. So what we do is we actually make a little hole in the eardrum here to ventilate the system, and this is what it looks like, a little tube over here. Think in terms of a can of juice. When you open up a can of juice and you pour out the juice, it comes out very slowly. But you put a second hole,
one, right,
it comes pouring out.
Right.
The ear has one hole. That's this eustache tube. If it's not working properly, if it's filled with infection and fluid, it's swollen like this, you make a little hole in the eardrum over here, and what happens is it ventilates the system so that all the fluid drains right down here and clears out. The hole will close up usually within days. So what we have to do is put a little tube into the eardrum to keep it open, and then as the child grows, or the adult if they need it, as the person grows, the eardrum actually pushes this tube up and out of the way, and it comes out by itself. The eardrum heals behind it, and hopefully the person has outgrown the problem. We mentioned beforehand about the nose, smell, it's important for breathing, but if we look back at in Bereshis, when Adam was brought to life, Vayipach v'apav. HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave him the ruach and the neshama through his nose, and that brought him to life. So the nose has to be extremely important.
That's right.
Just for that.
That's how life was brought into the world. Never thought about that.
And even more important, that when a baby is born, they must be able to breathe through the nose. Babies are what we call obligate nasal breathers. If a child cannot breathe through the nose when they're first born or for the first 6 to 9 weeks of life, they will have much difficulty breathing and sometimes end up in hospitals on breathing machines because the air has to go through the nose. Once they reach about 9 weeks, they learn also to breathe through the mouth. But initially, the nose is the most important part of the breathing.
So that's why Yipach Ba'apov. That's
it.
It's incredible.
If Chas v'Shalom, the back nose, they're born with an abnormality in the back of the nose where the tissues are not opened up in the back of the nose and is blocked up, babies will immediately have to have tubes for that and actually have people go into breathing machines until that's opened up. So the nose is extremely important.
So it's interesting.
Yipach Ba'apov is absolutely
right,
true.
That's exactly true.
Yeah.
I mean, in other words, the way the child breathes in the first stages of life is
has
Yipach
to be through the nose.
Wow, that's great.
Has to be through the nose.
That's
Yeah.
incredible. The breath of life is so important that we find that the last pasuk in Tehillim is Kol Haneshama Tahalel Ka, and the Gemara darshans Al Kol Neshima V'Neshima, for every breath of life. Tzarech L'Kala Yis Labori. You're supposed to give thanks to Hashem.